Thank goodness that's not on the record. Okay, so do something small, do something big, do something great, do something comfortable, do something uncomfortable, do something useful, do something to make a difference. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty good slogan. I'm not really a slogan person, but my favorite slogan is, "Into each life a little rain must fall." I think that's a useful one. But what about all of that? What's missing from that, series of statements? What kind of statements are those anyway? Do something small. What is that? What kind of sentence is that? Okay, is that an interrogative?
Imperative.
It's an imperative. So there's a huge controversy, like there is in every other world in linguistics, about the nature of imperative sentences. But taking the simplistic view, what's missing from that imperative sentence? The what?
Subject?
The object?
No, the subject.
The
Doing.
Right. But what does that usually take the form of? A pronoun, yes? Right? You don't say, "Mary, do something small," right? You could. You could say, "Mary does something small." But it's you, or we, or they, right? So it refers to a person or something. Well, don't you think that's pretty good advice? I think it's amazing advice, right? Do something small or do something big. Well, do something great. Do something comfortable. Do something uncomfortable. Do something useful. Well, do something that makes a difference. I didn't have a film series this year because nobody watches the films anyway. But on my list this year would have been the movie I, Tonya. Did you see that? And that's not like a science fiction movie, but it unfolds kind of like it would be. But did you see that film? Anybody see that film? Wow! So we can actually discuss it, right? What is that about? What is that film about?
An ice skater.
Right, an ice skater. Well, my cousin, my father's side, taught me to ice skate when I was like 5 years old. I think Tanya's mother taught her to ice skate when she was like 2 years old, or something like that. Well, I sat there and I watched that film in total amazement. And there are just so many things that happen in that film that are relevant to your stay at Curtis, and maybe your life and your life as a human being. So, how did that story unfold? And it refers to Tonya, who?
Harding.
Tonya Harding, yes. Okay. It's a pretty sad story. It's an interesting story. And I do think it relates to what we're doing in a very profound way. So how did that movie unfold? Who saw it? Brian, you saw it? Anybody else? And Eloise? Nobody else saw it. Give me the gist of the story.
So Tanya's got a very talented ice skater. She can do the triple axel, which no one else can do.
What is a triple axel?
You do 3 turns in the air and then you land on the leg that you didn't leave off of.
Right. It's incredibly
You land in,
difficult.
This position.
Like a Saturday night. John Travolta move, right? Okay, you don't even know who John Travolta is.
Oh, I love John.
Yeah. Well, okay, so she could do
Yeah,
that.
No one
could do
else
that.
can, but she's from a very poor family, and
Mom is a Jew.
her mom beats her, and
I mean,
but
she's
she-
hilarious in the movie, but
she marries someone that also beats her, and the person she marries decides that to get her to win this national competition, he's gonna send threatening letters to her opponent, like the other girl who may win. But then it escalates, and the person he hires to do that actually sends someone to hit her in the knee and disables her.
Physically disables the other person.
So then the FBI gets involved. This is a real story.
It is.
And they find Tanya still goes to the Olympics. She's not yet dismissed from the American League of Skaters, whatever it's called. But then when she comes back, there's a trial, and she's banned from skating for the rest of her life.
So it prevents her from her place in the U.S. Olympics, right?
Right, but she went twice to the Olympics.
But she never won anything.
No, the first time didn't she win second or third? But then the
Yeah,
second
but
time
she
she won
didn't-
sixth.
Right,
Right, she did worse the second time.
yeah.
Like
Well-
it's, like she went there and then her laces weren't done. There's a video of it, like a real video. And so she goes to the jury and she explains, like she stops midway of her choreography to redo her laces.
Yeah, but what precipitated the lace thing?
It wasn't very
She-
clear,
Well,
actually.
she was really nervous, I remember, or something like that.
Why was she nervous?
I forget. I mean, she had a lot of reasons to be, but I forget.
Yeah, well, what were some of the reasons why she was anxious all the time?
Oh, there was an FBI investigation on her. The media were around her house all the time.
But there's a much deeper reason why she was filled with anxiety all the time. This is a very, very important, in my opinion, a very important scenario, and it has a direct relationship to what it takes to be. It relates to an aspect of artistry, and it also relates to the Hickey story that we're looking at very closely. Who is the primary source of her anxiety? And maybe, oddly enough, the inspiration or motivation for her determination to do something big.
Mom.
Her mother, yes. And was her mother supportive?
No.
She put pressure on
Yeah, she was extremely negative. But see, that turned around. Tanya turned that around and focused all of her creative energy into becoming, something that was really, really special. She obviously had some kind of athletic prowess. And I think that Tanya's mother, she recognized that at her very young age, Tanya's young age. And she had this singleness of purpose that Tanya was going to become something great. Have you heard this story before? It's not an uncommon story, right? So the mother transfers her desire for her child to be great, and Tanya turns that into trying to develop whatever it is so that she can prove herself to not only herself but to her mother that she can do something extraordinary. And at the same time, the development of her skill allows Tanya to isolate herself and to look at that as her world and her security in life. Do you think that's a healthy dynamic? You do?
No.
Right. Well, I don't think it is. However, if you think a little more carefully about it, it is not an uncommon dynamic. And if you've been following over the aeons that you've been in this little class, you know that it is pretty much the story of everybody, is it not? Why is that? Suddenly there's dead silence. By the way, I welcome the two guests today. I have to say that publicly because we're on national television here. So. By the way, you know that both of these people were in the seminar. Well, you know Tim was, but I'm not so sure you know that Teddy was in the fledgling pledge class of the seminar back in 1870 or something like that. 2006, something like that.
2005.
Yeah. At any rate, well, back to this story. Why do I think that's not an extraordinary story? I think these circumstances are mildly extraordinary. But it's not an uncommon story. even in the kind of perverse unfolding of Tanya's life, it's just not that uncommon. Why do you think that that is not an uncommon story and that it's like an ordinary scenario in virtually everyone's life?
Because these sets of behaviors aren't unique.
Okay, well, that's a starting point. Those behaviors aren't unique. Why are they not unique?
Because
I mean, it might be in Tanya's case and others similar to that, and I think you find that in spades in the performing world. Not necessarily the music world, but across the board in any kind of performance art, whether it be the Ringling Brothers Circus and the High Trapeze Act or whatever it is. So why is the behavior uncommon? Not uncommon.
Well, because I think it starts with this sort of germ of, you have a kid and you want them to do well in the world. You want sort of something good for them. But then if you mix that with this sort of, I guess, hyper-competitive nature, or this almost like, I guess, a tendency for abuse, then suddenly it becomes, instead of this supporting role, you play this stressful role instead, and you force them to, compete, try and do their best, and basically invest everything that they are in that. And, given children's psychology and not necessarily knowing the entire, realm of possibilities available to them, they give into that. And it's not like, the same way that there are textbook reasons that manipulative people are the way they are, there's there are textbook reasons for why, certain, there are kids who can be pressured into doing this for the rest of their lives.
Okay, well, that's like an empiricist view, okay? And it's good, but what is underneath that? What is underneath that? There has to be, can we discover some kind of mental motivation for that? You're talking about textbook. Well, see, I think the textbooks describe particular scenarios or scenarios like that. Pathology, if you want to call it, and it's definitely pathological. But we've talked about this so many times in here, what is a possible explanation for why such things arise? And really what I was going at is the combination of the mother's motivation and then Tanya's interpretation of that motivation. And both of those things are quite similar. I think that they emerge from actually the same source, and that they're played out in different ways. So if you take that, what is the kind of common factor in all of that? What would that be? What could that be? It's something we've talked about ad infinitum in here. Competence?
Not actually. Competition?
Well, that might have something to do with it. What does the word competition mean anyway? See, people, including me, we throw these words around like, they're like marbles or whatever. But what does the word competition actually mean? Nobody knows? I etymology, that's my name. It's not I Tanya, it's I etymology. So what does it mean?
Assuming that has the same roots as competence?
Well, that's an interesting take. I don't know. Let's do a research project on that. No. What is that word? It has com, right? Which is what?
Competere means to strive for. Or late
No.
Latin, competitio means rivalry.
Together? Com?
To go
With,
against.
perhaps.
Circa 1600 according to Edom Online.
It's common petition.
To strive.
What is a
together with.
petition? Pretty soon I'm going to have to sit down. My limit for standing up is like 11.6 minutes. I think we've passed that.
Get a bunch of signatures and ruffle people's feathers and nothing actually happens.
Well, a petition, to petition something is to what?
Ask
against
for
To
it.
ask, right? And so, by a little extension, right, we might say that that's seeking or looking for something, asking for something. And com means what?
With or
With.
together.
What? Or what?
With or together.
Together. It means to seek together, to look for something together. That's really the root of that word, right? Is a competition, when you usually use the word competition, does it ring those bells? I don't think so. You know? I remember standing in front of the television in the DDR, you know, accepting my position in the international Bach competition and thinking, my God, what am I doing here? Right? After preparing 2 years for something like that. So that's not exactly what I was thinking about. You know, the 30 other competitors in my division. Right? So it's an interesting word. But back to the original programming or program, what are we talking about here? What is the common factor between Tanya and her mother? What is the source of that? We've said that her mother channels her energy and uses or thinks that Tanya can become the ticket for her reason for being, giving some kind of value to her life, probably doing something big, taking something small and doing something big, maybe doing something great, she hopes. And then Tanya takes this and she puts her whole identity into it.
Does it have to do with the quest for psychological continuity?
Yes, it does, of course. That's exactly what it does. Yeah? You don't see that? You don't agree with it? You may not agree with it. You're the one that doesn't agree all the time.
I agree with it.
Oh my gosh, right? We've made some progress. Right, so what is psychological continuity? Is that something actual?
No, it's psychological.
Well, oh my gosh, look, that mother is pretty actual character, right? But what is not actual about it? I mean, the behavior is something you can observe. But I think any strategy that attempts to change that behavior without taking into consideration of the motivations that's producing that behavior is doomed to failure. And also, I think that if you look at a behavior like that and you say that I am X, but I'm going to be non-X, well, you can't do that, right? Because the X is still included in whatever it is that the non is. For instance, I'm violent, I will be non-violent. Well, you can't define non-violence without the concept of violence, can you? I don't think so. I could be wrong, you know. So that movie is, to me, it's like a blatant scenario of what happens when you become something that you're good at and you use that as a way of defining who you actually are and what your motivation for living is. Tell me you don't know some people like that. And I think that has absolutely nothing to do with why you're here, or why I'm here, or why I did what I did in my life. Half the time I wasn't sure about what I was doing in my life. I just did it, right? And I think that's pretty good. Are you following any of this? Does it make any sense to you? All right, well, I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it, and I'll be back. What?
They're broken for years.
Yeah.
What had been broken?
We're talking
The
about a
stool.
chair, not you.
Oh, okay. Well, what do you think?
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, isn't that why that movie is successful? It's not just her story.
Well, is it successful? What does it attempt to
liked
say? What?
I liked it.
Why did you like it?
Well, I thought it was good.
Why was it good?
Well, it was crazy, but
Did you relate to it?
some, not as extreme as she was, but it's,
Do you remember the scene that's close to the end of the film where the mother is banging on the door, right? And Tanya's isolated herself even more, right? And the mother comes in and she almost seduces Tanya into believing that she has changed, right?
yeah.
And she says, "Oh, well, you know, everything I did was for you. And I really..." Does she actually say the words, "I love you"?
I'm not sure. I think Tanya says I love you. And she
Yes,
says, "Me
Tanya
too,"
says,
maybe.
"I love you." And they embrace, and I'm telling you, that's not the kiss that made them equal. Because it turns out, and Tanya, I think, discovers this, she has a recorder in her pocket.
Yeah, she feels it.
Just trying to get her to say something that will incriminate her so she can sell it to the press.
Yes. And so she knows that it's just another ploy.
Yeah.
I mean, how disappointing is that, right? But it's not uncommon. I mean, so isn't it the hiding a bad motive under a good one? It's that kind of dishonesty, right? Now, one of my mentors when I was working in the mental institution and the rehab center used to say to me, you know, you got to get honest. All these people have to get honest. And that has nothing to do with, you know, directly with, you know, counting the pennies and the dollars and the whatever, being a swindler. It has to do with being an emotional swindler. And it also has to do with coming to terms with what your mind has done to you and is doing to you and is in doing to everyone else. And if you can ever have an insight into that, then you're on a completely different track. And the odd thing is that if you are a genuine artist, if you ever come to terms with knowing what that really means, and you know my quirky definition of that is an artist is one that fits things together, puts things together. If you ever come to that, then you are free. In that sense, you are definitely free. And I think that the tragedy of that movie, I don't know why it's called a comedy, although there's some really funny parts to it. It's, you know, it's the human tragedy. Didn't we read a book of stories a couple of years ago called The Human Tragedy? Right? Who was that by?
Wasn't that the human comedy?
Was it The Human Comedy? I think that's the Divine Comedy. Was it I call it The Human Tragedy. Who were those stories by? Balzac, yes. And they were mostly tragic stories. All right. Well, it's just an interesting idea. And is ice skating something that's creative?
Yeah. You have to create a choreography.
Okay. But if the choreography is a creative aspect, does the creative aspect means that something is not seen before, or, you know, it's very open to possibilities.
Are you asking, is it creative as playing the Beethoven sonata, or is creative as improvising the sonata?
It's the same thing.
it could be the same thing, right? You see, we are now in the vicinity of the Hickey story. This is why all this, in my opinion, ties together. So, her choreography. Do you think she came up with that choreography herself? Do you think she worked it out herself, or was she coached?
I think there's a bit of both. She has a coach all the time.
Yeah, she had a coach.
There's no moment when an ice skater doesn't have a coach. I don't think.
What?
I don't think ice skaters, well, at least the individual ones, they always have a coach.
Didn't she get rid of her first coach?
Yeah, but then she got another one.
Well, the other one came to her, right, and said, "I'll make you into, King Kong or something." Well, okay, she has this choreography, right? I'm getting to other topics. It's so filled with the most important thing you'll ever learn. All right, so the choreography, can she do anything on the ice? Can she, levitate? Incorporate that into her choreography? What?
It'd be pretty cool if she did.
Yeah, it would be really great. However, there are certain things that prevent her from actually doing that. Although in the Hickey story, he says that when he sees this great play with Dr. J and Kareem Jabbar, that he's levitating out of his seat in joy. Well, that's a different kind of metaphor. And you have to jump up in the air and suspend whatever for a few minutes in order to do your triple axel and come down hopefully on the right leg.
Or the left leg, depending on which one you leap from.
Yes, that's true. Thank you for clarifying that detail. All right,
You're welcome.
but is the choreography actually free?
No.
No. But the choreography itself could express some kind of freedom. It's not completely predetermined.
Is
It's not like
improvisation
she-
actually free?
No, it is not. Hence the correlation between the Beethoven sonata and an improvised sonata. No one, well, you recognize that. I'm not so sure that some people recognize that. So why is it free and not free?
Well, she ultimately could do whatever she wants within her reach. She can't levitate.
Well, within her reach, that's a very big quantifier, isn't it? Or
Yeah.
qualifier.
But she
Well-
doesn't have to do she can't do the choreography exactly the same every time anyway.
No, it's never the same because
So
it's
it's
not
not
that time.
that
You learned
fixed.
that from Chalgadaki, right? No. So what is it? What do you call that? What do you call those kind of things? What is it that makes the Beethoven and the improvisation basically the same?
They both come from the same source.
Yes, and the source is what?
Human mind.
Creativity. All right, now we're going around in circles.
Well, and principles of music.
Yeah, and those are,
For the human mind.
Yeah.
those are called what?
Properties?
What else could they be called? But the properties themselves represent what? Could the properties be anything?
According to some.
According to what?
According to some.
Oh, yes, according to some what?
According to some people, the earth is flat too.
Yes. That brings up a different topic, right? I'm free to believe whatever I want, right? I'm free to say that, I believe that the earth is flat, right? And if somebody asks you, well, what's underneath that? I mean, what's underneath the flat disk that the earth is? And of course the answer would be something holding it up.
The turtle.
A turtle, yeah? And then what's underneath that?
A bigger
Well,
turtle
more
than a
turtles. Well, what's underneath that? Well, come on,
This is
it's
where the
turtles
pattern
all the way
continues.
down, right? And we're not finished with that. What's all the way down? At any rate, no. So,
No, this is a divine comment.
come on, right. So you have these principles, you have properties, but what are they? They represent what?
What properties are you talking about? Like what she physically can and can't do?
Yes.
Oh.
Oh, well, the answer is right in what you said. What you physically can do. What is that? What is the physically part of it?
What you're capable of.
Yeah, but what makes you capable? As a matter of fact, I'm not sure that any of us know exactly what we are capable of.
All right, touche.
Any language, is exploring only a fraction of what the possibilities are. But some things are impossible or highly improbable. So, what is physically possible? Isn't that the answer right there? What does physical refer to?
Body.
What is a law?
In what sense? Law of nature, law of government, law of...
Boundaries.
What?
Boundaries.
Well, okay. A boundary could be a kind of a law, yes. Okay. What's the boundary of a black hole called?
event horizon.
The event horizon. Well, what is the significance of that boundary?
The point of no return for anything.
That's like in,
Like
science today,
when light crosses
popular science. Give me a better definition of that.
it and someone else.
It's the point at which the known properties or known physical laws
No longer apply.
do what? Fall apart or unexplainable. Right. Okay, wasn't it Hawking that, together with Leonard Susskind, found out that it is not true that when something falls into a black hole, that the information is irretrievably lost? Didn't they discover that that's not true? That information does escape from a black hole. And some people think that there's enough information that escapes from the black hole that the actual material could be in some form reconstituted. That's an hypothesis. We're way off track. Well, but we've said it. There are laws of nature. There are physical laws. The physical laws are instantiated in your body, or the phenotype is what?
The phenotype.
The phenotype is a representation of the laws of nature in terms of what? Chemical bonds, biology, so forth and so on, yes? And so there are laws or constraints that must be operating in the human mind that determine what you can do and you cannot do, yes? We have no idea the extent of those constraints. And anyone that says that they do, that is science fiction. We just don't know enough. But there are physical constraints that define a certain parameter concerning her choreography, right? Doesn't that relate directly to the Hickey story and his idea about rules and laws? Laws are liberating for him. And the minute they become less liberating, the minute they stop become liberating, right? Allow you to do anything within the context of the law, they become governing and they put a damper on the creativity. They begin to control. And so they lose that joy and that sense of freedom that the law or the rule was intended to permit. All right, so what is it in Tanya and her mother that's the same? Then we'll finish this up and we'll go to Bach for a few minutes. The mother's controlling attitude towards her daughter was, I think, a psychological move to get her out of her own misery and agony of existence. Because apparently her own husband was not the greatest in the world. Except in the movie, Tanya's father was a kind of benevolent figure. But apparently the mother's life with the father was not the greatest in the world. And he ends up leaving. It could have been because of the mother's fault. But the mother was caught in this fact that she didn't like who she was. And so she decided that Tanya was going to be the way in which she could prove that she was worth something. And then Tanya turns that around, and even the misery and the agony that she went through with her mother became something. She explored something, an ability that she had. And she focused or funneled or channeled all of her identity into that. Doesn't she say perpetually throughout the film, I can't do anything but skate. That's my entire life. She keeps saying that over and over and over again. Well, I don't think that's an uncommon story in people's lives. I think they attach their meaning to what they do. And one of the points of our time together in here is to ensure that those ideas are exposed to you and that you understand what it means to be in music or doing music and what music relates, or how music relates to you as a being. You are an ordinary person, just like everyone else. You have this ability, but it is not who you are, is it? I don't think so, right? One last comment. This might go on for another 3 hours. I was at a dinner, and Palm Beach is an extraordinary place. Most people, you say Palm Beach, all those rich people, and there you get into the material wealth and, how awful that is, and everyone's, that's what's ruined the world, and it's the elite few that have the money and blah, 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 and so forth. But, Saturday night, I was at the Albert Schweitzer Hospital Gala. The Albert Schweitzer Hospital is in Haiti. You're not supposed to pronounce the H, I found out. It's Haiti, right? Let's just go with Haiti, all right? And there were a lot of people there. And it was a gala, and they had a silent auction. And within minutes, I was looking at it on my iPhone. About 15 minutes, they had raised over $1 million. And I got to thinking, if there are 300 galas during the so-called season in Palm Beach, the Red Cross Gala, the Cancer Society Gala, the Kidney Foundation Gala, the that foundation, and this hospital in Haiti that's, besieged by all kinds of diseases and poverty. Those people supply the money for the operation of a lot of these beneficent and benevolent foundations. And so you can't really write off the fact that there are rich people in Palm Beach. They just don't sit there and sit under a palm tree. right? They do contribute. And more money is raised in those 3 months, in February, March, and April, than virtually any other time anywhere else. And then the other thing is that in living in Palm Beach, you get to know people who seem to be much more grounded and much more authentic than others. But you can't always tell. And I think people are people, and there are people who see through the ploys and the strategies of this kind of psychological identity, and they try to find ways out of it. And the little organization that I'm involved in is one of those. It's a, you know, that it's a think tank. I've talked about this before, very similar to the Aspen Institute, which explores ideas. And it's also very similar to John Brockman's The Edge, right? Which has somehow been twisted around to mean what it, isn't that the theme for this year? Well, at any rate, those things are exploring these ideas that are on the edge of creativity in the hopes that it will help to free humanity from these rigid structures, which are all psychological in nature. They're not really, they have ramifications, I think, physically or phenotypically, but they're all rooted in psychology. So, I was at a dinner, and there were about 10 of us at a private dinner. And someone at the table asked me, and I hate to be asked these kinds of questions, do you think music has an effect on society? Do you think it can change society? So what do you think my response was?
Leave me alone.
Well, that was one, but I couldn't get out of it. Because the minute somebody said that, they were all like, you know, glaring at me. And these are people of some significance. I won't say importance. And the person that asked me this question is a very private person, but he's like a startup person. He starts up, goes out and looks for people to help start up projects. And he's a very smart man. And this question came out of the blue because I was there for, you know, an incredible French dinner. But this question was asked, you know, do you think music can change society? So what do you think my answer was to that? I wasn't in a particularly good mood either. What do you think I would say, having been in my proximity for a while?
Would have rather flipped the question back onto him for what he does, or he would have just said yes and left it at that?
What do you think I said? I did not flip it back on him. I said something entirely different, which suddenly everyone at the table became a porcupine. What do you think? This is exactly what I try to get you to do in here, to look at your own thoughts. What are you thinking? What are you thinking about me, right, at this moment? It tells you something about what you're thinking about yourself. What do you think my response to that question was?
You asked the same question back.
No.
Isn't that a choice?
What?
Isn't that a choice?
I didn't follow that track. But it could be. I think there's an element of that, but you have to define what that choice is. And you know I do not believe in so-called free will. I think that term has to be refined very carefully. I think that we make decisions, you know, to have coffee or not or whatever, but you're actually not making that decision. Consciousness is not doing that. That's a totally different topic. But I admit that, that's an important one thing. But what do you think my response would be?
Well, society
Does
is-
music
is
change
people.
society? Can music change society?
Heavens no.
No, of
Society
course
is
not.
people, not some sort of external object. You can't just change the society, you change, individuals have to make the change.
I don't know what you mean by that. Clarify it.
Well, I don't know what is meant by changing society. What is society?
Well, can it influence or change the behavior of society?
Well, it might
A
be able
society.
to change the behavior of an individual.
No, but this goes back to the nature of experience, right? Is experience something out there? You don't have experiences. You what? You create them, right? So, in that sense, what, are you leaving?
I have a trumpet lesson and I haven't warmed up yet.
Well, what is going to happen to the...
I deferred it to you.
Okay, all right. Okay. Well, at any rate, it blew up into a gigantic discussion because there was someone there at the table that was a very famous artist. And we're going to talk about, she's going to be part of the seminar next year, but she said to me, I said, well, I think that an artist works in society, and I said, if you look at Rothko's The Artist's Reality, there is a whole section in there that talks about Michelangelo and the fact that the society in which he was working and his sponsorship by Julius II, that Michelangelo was using that context, the religious context, to explore his art and perfect his artistic technique. And that Michelangelo was not per se a religious person, and he was not making religious art to change or support society. He was an artist that was looking to perfect his own concept of art. And it is true that Michelangelo contributed significantly to the development of, mimetic art, or the reincorporation of certain classical ideals that were in sculpture and incorporated into painting. It was one of the big things of the Renaissance. Not the discovery of three-point perspective, but the rediscovery of such things, and then the perfection of that. But it happened to be that the religious figures that he painted were the stimulus for increasing his artistic expression. So the artist, per se, according to Rothko, does not set out or have this agenda to change society in that way. He's not making a social statement. Well, that can be debated, and I think arguments are for and against it or can be made that are quite valid. But across the table for me was a woman who is the artist, and she said, well, what about the Cathedral of Lights? You know what that is? Somebody look that up. Cathedral of Lights. And there's actually to my surprise, there's a picture of it. I had no idea of this. Who is the architect? Speer. You know who he is? Or Speer. S-P-E-E-R.
Is this the Nazi Cathedral of Light?
Do you see the picture of it?
Yeah.
It's the most phenomenal thing. So she asked me, well, what about the Cathedral of Lights? When I said that the artist operates, autonomously, or is concerned with the creation of art and this kind of internal motivation and expression. She said, what about that? What does it say about the Cathedral of Lights?
It was 152 anti-aircraft searchlights which were aimed skyward to create vertical bars surrounding all the people.
Yes, for the Nuremberg rallies, right? And it was this unbelievable sight where all the people were surrounded by these columns of light. And apparently it was an amazing technological feat. And then I thought about that and I said, well, you know, it's possible. Well, look at that particular circumstance. Speer was an architect and he was an extremely creative man. And he was chosen to be the architect for the new city that Hitler wanted to design. He never built anything. 'Cause I think there's one like silo or something that he built in Berlin. So, is that artistic expression Nazi? Or is that inspiration for doing that because the stadium could not be built in time for the rallies? Does that directly relate to being a Nazi or an expression of Nazism? She couldn't answer that. She says, well, it's questionable. I think it is questionable.
I think that like language, something artistic like that can be used to represent something.
Exactly.
But it's not inherently
Right.
Nazi.
And that was exactly my response. And I think it's very important to make that distinction. Now, tie all this together. Because everything that we've discussed so far has one common point. What is it? What do you think it is? This may seem boring, but if you hear only just a fraction of a second of what I'm trying to communicate, it could make a big difference. So what do you think the takeaway in all of this is? What is the point? Was Speer any different from Tanya's mother, or from Dr. J, or from, maybe he was different from that. I don't know. Is it too confusing? What does it all mean? What am I trying to say? What are we trying to say? Why do I think it's so important? Okay, all right, let's put a hold on that, and you can think about it while we're looking at some Bach. Now, you know that we are in this cavalcade of music history, and 12 pieces that I think really you can look at and say, this represents a significant feature of music, or what music can do. And I would like to try to finish up with just some observations, a few more observations about this Bach fugue. The Monteverdi Madrigal that we did was from 1638, and that is definitely a kind of synthetic moment not synthetic moment, but a new moment in the history of music. And that madrigal introduces or tries to synthesize some of the things that had been discovered by Palestrina and Josquin des Prez, in the fact that fifth boundaries can organize units of music in a way in which strict intervallic progressions could not do. But it was discovered that it was in the strict intervallic progressions that within those there were certain groups of things that began to emerge, centering around single fifth progressions. And that you could ultimately hinge together these fifth movements, right? And create a larger scale form. Yet those fifth boundaries were all connected together by the same simple procedures that connected the intervals together. That all is predicated on the concept of consonance and dissonance. Well, Monteverdi took that and took it to a new level, and most of his work was predicated on the new idea that the music itself could be used to express, could be used in a much more expressive way. And in Monteverdi's music, he took the experiments of chromaticism in the High Renaissance, and he began to refine it so that it could enhance this new way of constructing musical units. And then he combines that with the imitative counterpoint, which has basically been thinned out, and also sections of interposing on top of this, intersections or exclamatory sections that heighten the expressiveness of the text. And then he invented, so-called, this new style to create an agitated emotional state, the stile concitato. Now, in that collection of madrigals, I said that usually the third item in that title is left out. It's the madrigals of war and love and representation. They're theater works, works that were meant to be represented on the stage. And that is one of the primary goals of Monteverdi's work in that particular collection of madrigals, is that they become physically expressed on the stage. Well, of course, that connects to the really new innovation of the early 17th century, which was opera. Yeah? Well, it's interesting. There's only about 100 years difference between the Monteverdi madrigal from 1638 and this fugue, which is in probably from the 1730s. But my goodness, what a vast difference. Now, in that Monteverdi madrigal, if you can think about it, that is not fugal. Although if you turn back just about 20 years, the dense polyphony of Josquin des Prez and Palestrina and Orlando di Lasso was the norm. Well, when you get to Monteverdi, suddenly that kind of intense polyphony disappears, and it's used in a much more refined way. Well, between Monteverdi and Bach, gradually, having worked out these principles of organization by fifth movement, not harmony, by fifth movement, boundary intervals, the imitative polyphony begins to flood the texture again. And so in the 1730s, this particular piece of music and most of Bach's music from the 1730s until his end is an attempt to carry the potential for imitative writing or motivic development to the extreme level that is possible. Are you following what I'm saying? So you have this intense polyphony, vocal polyphony if you want to call it that, then its disappearance, and they're focusing on other things, and gradually the polyphony makes, imitative polyphony makes a reappearance and becomes part of this elaborate conception of fugue. And then what happens after the death of Bach? It disappears again, right? And then the next composer that we're going to look at, Haydn, is the one who reintroduces that kind of imitative writing into his work. And then that is put together with the use of chromaticism. And so music is moving along in this cycle, which I call experimentation, selection out of a few things, and then synthesis with what had gone before. And it creates this kind of cycle. There are some views of history that are like that, cyclic views of history. Well, once again, I think that's founded in some kind of nature of human mental inquiry or structure. All right, so this piece to me is a perfect example of what mid-18th century music could do and was trying to show. So I want to look at two things. I want to look again at the fugue subject itself, because there are many things in it. I think we've already talked a little bit about it, but I want to make sure that the concept is clear. Then I want to look at the very first episode of this fugue. So let's try to, do you have it? Okay.
You gotta turn on.
You have to turn the machina. And believe me, this has not progressed since the day you were here.
We didn't have this technology.
This is equally as
Very advanced.
primitive. We didn't need to do that.
Nothing like it.
Did we work on this one together? No.
You personally?
Yeah.
No.
You walked in though while I was passing.
Yes. It's
I
got to
think
be
it's
on
good.
game.
Yeah, game.
Yep, there you go. Stop. Okay, all right, now, there are two things. This is the wedge, right? Okay. All right. This is, of course, supposed to be an E minor. Well, let's take a look at this, right? It's E, right? And then this goes D sharp, right? And then what's the next tone?
F.
F sharp, right? And then what?
D natural,
Well, let's do the ascending line first.
G sharp,
G sharp, right? A, B, right?
A sharp.
A sharp.
Isn't there an A sharp?
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna plot it out, there's an A sharp. Well,
Let's play it one more time. Yeah, wait a minute. I hear A natural.
There's both.
there's both.
You hear A natural,
And
right?
then A sharp.
then A sharp,
Yeah.
right? But the interval that occurs over the A sharp is what?
Augmented sixth.
It's an augmented sixth. The point that I'm trying to make is that this ascent is not an E minor. It's an E major, right? And the initial tone that accompanies this is that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah? And then this becomes what?
C natural.
Natural. This becomes sharp, right? That's the chromatic interval, right? Now, so it's odd that this fugue subject, the key signature is this, but the fugue subject itself is E major. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. Does this go through a D natural?
Yeah.
But the D natural comes after the D sharp, right?
Right.
Okay, so the descent in the lower voice goes what? If you look at it from the standpoint of E major.
It's just a chromatic descending line.
That, right?
Yeah.
You got it? Okay. Now, the problem is, what is the relationship of these two voices to each other? Obviously, that's that, right? And this has got to be descending, yes? So this is a passing tone, yes? The F sharp is a passing tone, right? So that's degree 7, yeah? In major, that's degree 2. All right, when 2 and 7 sound together, creates a consonant interval, right? But the problem here, the G sharp is actually a consonant, yeah? All right, does this G sharp go with this tone, or does the G sharp go with the C? This is a passing tone, right? So if the principle is consonants, dissonance, consonants, dissonance, consonants, which is what it is, it splits itself into two parts like that. There's something odd going on here. So what's the basic design here?
The G sharp would have to go with the C sharp.
It should go with that, yes, I think it should. So this goes with this, and then this becomes, that's a genuine consonance, isn't it? Yeah, because that's the 6th degree. Yeah? All right, and this becomes 5/6, which supports that passing tone. Yeah? That's the explanation of the consonants and dissonance in the structure of the fugue subject itself, right? But the minute that the fugue subject is displayed, there's a tag on it, right? Then this is natural,
Right.
and it comes down in minor, right? And then if that weren't enough, if you didn't understand that the third in relationship to the tonic you get that, what I think is the structural third, right? Okay, so the interesting thing about this, and is what places it in the technical developments of the 18th century, it was even in Bach's music, of course, but in the music of the pushing towards the second half of the first half of the 18th century, people were beginning to recognize that there's only one tonality, and that is major, and that it can be inflected to appear as minor. Now, we've been through this before, and I will say it one more time, that the triadic structures that appear in a major key, right? All of the sonorities on the principal fifths, this is the fifth below, yeah? And then the fifth above, all of those have the same quality. And you know that I believe that there's no such thing really as a triad until you get to much higher levels of organization, where the triad becomes part of the primitives that define constituents in the structure. But the triad is an assembly of 2/3, major and minor. One is major and one is minor. Well, if we do this as an unordered pair of a major and a minor third, where the major third is projecting, where it is first, from the bottom, you have a major triad. Well, the major tonality says that the anchoring fifths, the fifth above and the fifth below, have major triads, where the assembly of a major third and a minor third, where the major third projects. If you reverse this order so that the minor third projects rather than the major third, you have the minor mode. But you still have the major and the minor third. That is the difference between the two modes. And it is the only place, if you look at the modal system, you slide it up and down, it's the only place in the key of E where you would have the correspondence. Because the triads on the sixth, right? All three of those triads are the exact reverse of this. So intuitively or instinctually or innately, it became obvious that you could mix properties of both major and minor and still have the effect of E as a tonality. Doesn't matter whether it's major or minor. None of this would have been possible had not the madrigal composers of the mid-17th century not started exploring with, if they hadn't started exploring with the effects of random chromaticism, it would have not kind of congealed into this awareness. Are you following what I'm saying? Is it clear? I think it's remarkable. To me, this is the first kind of technical reason why you have in Haydn, which we're going to look at, the complete assimilation of major and minor into one fabric. Haydn can't go 10 bars without juxtaposing both the major and the minor elements. And when sonata form or sonata procedure begins to, get rolling, right after the death of J.S. Bach, it has a dramatic influence on the character, the nature, and the kind of workings out of sonata form. And we're going to look at a Haydn string quartet that doesn't really follow what the schema that's in the theory book says that a sonata form should follow. All right. Okay, let's listen to this and we'll go let's go back to the beginning and we'll listen to the first episode. Now, one more time. This is an example of a concerto fugue. There are many examples of this in orchestral music and some instrumental music. Well, obviously this is an organ piece, but a concerto fugue starts out with a ritornello. In a fugue like this, the exposition is completely closed off in the tonic. In this case, it's a 4-voice fugue. And then there are episodes where the solo instrument would come in with some kind of figuration, and then there will be bits or parts of the exposition, maybe the fugue subject, that will intersperse. And that alternates with the episodes. And then at the very end, there's a complete, almost unchanged statement of the ritornello. You find that in the final movement of the Brandenburg 4. We've discussed that. It's exactly the same procedure. And in other Brandenburg concertos. So it's ritornello, solo section, ritornello. So the large-scale surface form is ABA. Yeah? But that really doesn't tell you anything about it. Okay, let's go from the beginning again, and we're going to concentrate on the first episode. That's amazing. Stop. Where are we? Are we in the tonic? Yeah. Have we gone any place other than that?
B.
Not really.
Yeah, B. B what? B major, B minor, B good, B bad,
Major.
B what?
Minor? I mean, it's
Well-
major, minor
Well,
in the same
if the
sense that the
subject
subject
is in
is.
the major, then, okay.
It's the same thing, major, minor. Yeah? Okay, but right now we're back to E. And this is it. All right, stop. All right, you have to turn it up a little more. All right, you have any idea what's going on in that? What?
Sounds really hard.
Well, it is kind of, all right. It's just only, it's like Karen Carpenter, we've only just begun. All right, play it again. Can you do that? I'm sorry, the responsibility of this
Does this
technical.
fugue have a name?
What?
Does it have a name, this fugue, or it's just?
It's called a wedge.
Is it?
Yeah, because the subject
Okay,
goes
yeah,
up
yeah, okay.
like one of the simple machines. Ah! Okay, stop. Okay, what can we get from that?
Goes from E to E.
No, not pitches, figured bass, and the notes and everything. Okay?
E with a
The
5 to 6.
ubiquitous treble clef. That's the only clef I really know. Okay? All right, so it obviously starts on an E, right? Is there a chord?
5 to 6.
You do have that, right? Okay, and then it does do this, right?
Yeah, and.
Now,
and
in the
goes-
we're leaving out the figuration. This goes mi, re, mi, yeah?
Yeah.
And then there's also something up there, right? I want you to try to get that out of your mind. Let's do it one more time. Listen carefully if you can. This system is. Stop, okay? All right?
Bass moves down.
What happens?
Ray.
This goes where?
Down.
Well,
Yep,
isn't
Ray,
it-
what?
If we
Isn't
say
there a
enough.
4-3 over the E first?
Yeah, well, let's forget
Or
that.
4-2, sorry. So Ray 6.
Goes to that, right? Okay, so this point of departure is 5-3, right? But we find out that this is 6-3, 6-3, yes? Now, there's something in between here.
La sharp.
4-2.
What if I have all those tones there together? Is that a C natural?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't like that A sharp. Let's take it out. Okay? Then this becomes what? Remember, that's a chromatic tone. It's like a, not even part of the, it's definitely not part of the basic idea here. So this is what kind of sonority, if we maintain that that might be sustained. It isn't, because you definitely hear this, right? Dun, 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 right?
Yeah.
All right, forget the A sharp. So what does this become?
6-3.
Yep,
Okay, you-
4-3, 6-3, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so let's see if we can make that work, or is that repeated, right? This is an odd sound, but it's not that odd. I say that this is diatonically what's behind this. Literally, you don't really hear anything. You don't hear the C hanging over. But this is so clear. When you put the A sharp in there, that becomes like a diminished 5-3, yeah? Even though this interval is like a second, yeah? Okay, so let's play once again. Stop, okay? Isn't it exactly the same thing again?
Mhm.
All right, give me the notes.
Do. Mi.
La. And then what is the note in between here,
G. Sol.
right? Okay,
Sharp, but we're not doing that.
no, not yet, okay? So this is this basically the same thing? Is that a 4-3?
Totally.
Yeah? Oh, have I done this right? Yes, okay. So this is 6-3, 4-3, okay? All right. Was this an F, that's in the key, right?
Yeah.
F sharp? Okay. All right, let's keep going. Oh, no, let's back it up. Stop, okay? Something's different in here. What's this chord?
6/4.
6/4.
Wow, yeah. See, when I get to the blackboard, I turn into even more of an idiot than I am, okay? All right, so this is like, what happens here is like that, isn't it? Okay? All right, so this is what? What's the note in here?
F sharp.
Yeah, so we still have that, right? And that should be carried over. But then this suddenly turns into a 6/4. All right, so we might call this some kind of sequential pattern, yeah? Okay, now do you notice anything peculiar about the base of this?
Wow.
It's the same.
It's the lower part of the fugue subject, yes? Okay? All right. And, all right, well, this chord has some kind of significance because it's different. The sequential repetition is broken off here, right? Although it's almost imperceptible because it keeps the figuration going, right? And this is where it becomes a little difficult to play. But, okay, so let's do it again. Oh! Did you get that?
It's an E sharp.
A sharp.
Well, just yes. Just think about the chords that are here. Now we might have to do some chromatics. Let's do it one more time. I'm sorry, you that you have to do this, but it's the price you pay. Oh, stop right there. Okay. Eventually, this turns into what? Into that 6/3. All right. So whatever is in here is an effort to get there, right? Okay. Now, I just want to point out that I think that this is a projection up on top of this, right? That in a large scale sense, this becomes some kind of voice exchange. The E minor chord is being prolonged in here. What happens here, though to the 6/4?
Well, then it goes to A, possibly 4/2.
It doesn't do that?
You're talking about the next chord?
The A sharp one with the F sharp one.
Doesn't it do that?
Doesn't it go directly to 4/2 with A natural underneath?
Well-
Do we ever actually hear the B minor?
No.
It's major, but it
Or
is
is it
there.
major? Okay.
This goes
Yeah.
there, right? Right, that makes it, this is the 4/2, yeah? Okay, so this goes 4/2. This is a really complicated place in it, right? This is like a cadential 6/4, right? And it's displaced by, it should be like a B chord, some kind of B minor chord, or B major chord. It's displaced by the cadential 6/4. It's a stopping point in this. Well, it's the end of the fugue subject with the descending line here. This is interposed between that, and it really is a declaration of the resolution of that 6/4, right? You don't hear this. It proceeds through the passing tone, A, and that is what moves into the G, yeah? Which gives you the 6/3. It's a very complex series of tones, right? You with me? Now I'm leaving out the accidentals.
You do hear that beat.
What?
You play it twice.
Yeah, of course you
It
do
doesn't
hear it.
just go to the 4/2.
Yeah, but you do hear it inside of this, yeah?
Right.
And then the 4/2 happens, yeah? So, so it's a pattern of la, si, la, sol, right? You hear, okay? Let's go. And I think in a certain way, that's going to be si, la, sol, although that is inside of, that's not really a 3 degree. That's part of the 5, the 5th boundary chord. That's not a tonic note there, okay. All right, but this is the first inversion of that tonic chord. So we've got 1/6, okay? So on the large scale, it's that. Let's keep going. Good, okay? Then what happens?
To make sure.
Goes down like that, doesn't it?
Sure.
And then that, right? So this should actually be there, which it is, right? And then that, right? And this little solo episode is ending right there. You want to hear this moving back up to the G, but it doesn't do that, right? Because the scale passages start up again on E. So, in a large sense, this is a repetition of the tag that's on the fugue subject. Sol, fa, mi, fa. Yeah, did I do it right? Yes, okay? And this is like the cadential chord. And you notice that it's got this little neighbor figure in it, right? Which is back over here. Even within all of the fugal technique and trying to create motivic coherence using the same material in each one of the voices, the episodic material is much more interesting, actually, because it shows you that regardless of whether he's consciously thinking about it or not, he's prolonging a sonority, which uses a simple consonance, dissonance, consonance configuration. And inside of that, it's consonance, dissonance, consonance, dissonance. And that is the hallmark of the transition into the next style, where the imitative stuff disappears into the internal workings of the prolongations. And so no longer is the motivic development in each individual voice directly. It becomes, in a certain sense, verticalized, and the relationship between the two outer voices becomes necessary, and it actually is compelling the voice leading. This is all completely anchored in voice leading, but it's the outer voices that determines this as a kind of constituent unit, right? So even within Bach, you have the seeds of what is to become the basis for establishing really genuine large-scale form, like the sonata. Even though, ironically, the large-scale form of this piece is totally determined by some kind of external device. A, ritornello, B, development, solo, alternating solo episodes interspersed with elements of the ritornello, then a direct repetition, right? All right, now I'd like to listen to the entire fugue one more time, and then I'm going to ask a question about Haydn. This is one of the great masterpieces of music. Stop. Some people ask me, why in the world do you put that Nachschlag or turn on it there at the end?
Everybody.
Why do you think I do that? Not everyone. It's not fashionable now to do that. So I was told, yeah.
Is it not
I do it.
recommend?
And I don't do it consistently either. That's another thing. I believe consistency is the enemy of art. So And the other thing is that,
That works.
well, you obviously know that this is me playing, but my approach is that if you're playing somebody else's music, that it should be like you're making it up. And so I think that a variety, especially with organ music, is so dull, right? That you need to, like, spontaneously, come to your decisions about what you're going to do, right? So my articulation is never consistent, right? But I hope that it means that I am listening to every note that's going by, and that I'm, making a decision in a certain sense, although I don't think I'm controlling that, to do so and so because I hear such and such going on in the music. And I think that, I've been playing this piece for like at least 300 years. I premiered it when Bach was alive. Right. No. And, I've reached this point. I think the registration has to be like an aspect of improvisation, that you change manuals spontaneously. You don't scratch your head, pull out your hair about what to do, about all of that. And you just go. You just play it. This is obviously from memory. But that's how it should unfold, right? And, all right, let's keep going. I won't make you go back to the beginning.
Just go back.
Okay. Okay, well, that's a massive piece of music. And I don't know, it's one of my favorites. So I hope you got something out of that. All right, now we go a few more days into the 18th century. Actually, about 30 more years or 40 more years. And we're going to talk about Franz Joseph Haydn. Now, in my little survey of music history, I only take Haydn as a representative of the late 18th century because it was Haydn that really established the new style. And you know, it's Schenker's idea that the change in style between the first half of the 18th century, the second half of the 18th century, is the way in which the repetitions are formed. And I've tried to give you a background on how I think that transition happened. And this is a piece that demonstrates how that was made possible. Now, I just want to talk about a particular passage in a quartet that we have done in score reading, ad infinitum. Everybody has had to do this. It's on the conducting exam, which I have to do in a few minutes. But I want to talk about it. And it's that famous passage in the second movement of Opus 54, number 1. And it's in that middle passage. Do you all remember that passage? You all had to do it. Where it's in C major, right? And then, right? Right? You know that passage? Yeah? Okay. Well, let's talk about that for just a minute. This is why I think it's not okay to say that you can entertain opinions that the earth is flat, and that's all right. Okay? And it has an equal value to other scientific views. I don't think it's okay to say that. I definitely think some opinions and some ideas about things are just wrong. At least they're dead ends. Okay, well, let's look at this for a moment. Okay, so the piece is in C, yeah? This little movement is in C. But the first section here has come to a stop or a tonicization, if you want to call it that, on the fifth boundary. All right, so we're definitely doing that. Okay, well, the first thing that happens is that this turns into like a 6/3 chord, right? So we've got this, okay? You know, do I want to do it that way? No, let's do it this way. I'm going to put this up here, and we're going to do, yeah, okay. Then the next thing that happens is this is chromaticized, right? D sharp, okay? So that imitates this thing, all right, and then this goes to what? C, right? So this is like a 6/5, yeah? Okay? And then what happens? Isn't this chromaticized? Doesn't that do that, right? And this goes up to A. Do you all remember this piece? Surely you remember it, yeah? Okay? Okay, and then this stays there. There's a transfer of this up to the top, but I'm not indicating that. Right? So this turns into like a 6/5, yeah? Isn't that what that chord is? Do, mi, sol, la. It's a 6/5, okay? And then this chord becomes chromaticized, right? And this goes to, and I think it's actually spelled exactly this way. This becomes like a diminished seventh, right? Okay, but this is where the weird stuff happens. This goes from this diminished seventh to that. It's a 6/4, right? And then it goes to where there's no room for the E flat, right? Let's say that, right? And then to B flat. The voicing is all weird, but that's essentially what happens, okay? How is it that we get from here to here? What is this interval? What is the interval? Do sharp to fa is what? It's a diminished fourth, but it's enharmonic to what? A major third, yeah? Okay. Well, you try doing that in, the harmony class, right? Okay. This is, I think it's some kind of evidence that Haydn is hearing this. He's not, scratching his head and thinking, what note am I going to put next? He's not doing that, right? It's all internal. The notational things often hide the significance of what's going on. All right, but the idea is, how do you make the transition from this, which is the diminished seventh in what key area? Or chord? D minor, yeah? To this chord, right? Which is the cadential 6/4 that belongs to, let's put this down here so you get a fifth, like that. Yep? Okay. Well, I think Haydn does this in exactly the right way. And I don't think there's any secret about what's going on here. It just sounds strange because of this. But you do notice that we have that kind of common note there, right? Okay, all right. Well, technically, where should this go? It should actually go right there, yeah? To D minor, yeah? Well, what is the relationship then of the B flat to this D minor chord? You've all heard this lecture many, many times before. It's a 5/6, yeah? So this is a displacement. You don't hear this. You actually hear that. And this D goes up there, right? So it's an octave transposition. And it exposes the 6/4 position, which allows him to correctly move to the boundary interval of B flat. It's simple. It's very simple. That is the most simple and I think the correct explanation. Well, there is an alternate explanation for this. And that is that since that is going to some kind of F, right, which actually is not going to F, it's a displaced sonority, right? This would actually go to a D minor sound. And there's no way to get to an F without changing that and doing the 5/6. So it's not really a D minor sound at all. It's not really an F major sound at all. It's some kind of displaced thing. Well, there's an interpretation that insists that this chord is spelled wrong. And that the reason that Haydn does this is because this is a diminished seventh that is relating to F. Now, what is the diminished seventh of F? Spell that. E, G, B flat, D flat. Oh, wow, okay. All right. Well, the C sharp is a D flat. Yeah? Okay. Now, how does that relate to that? If you spell this as D flat, E, G, B flat, what position of the diminished seventh do you have? It's a 4/2, yes? Where does that 4/2 go? Where does it have to go? This needs to go up or down? must go down. The 4-2 inversion of the 4-2 chord goes down, yes? It's the inversion, only inversion that does not have a direct correspondence with a similar inversion of the dominant seventh, right? So the normal position of this, because this is the seventh of the sonority, so this would actually go to this chord. It would go to a C chord, not an F, a C. And then this would go to there. Well, we've got the wrong boundary, right? Because B flat is the boundary, not F. F is the boundary of B flat. The C has nothing to do with this, right? And so you say the argument is, well, it's just a respelling. But it's not. It isn't. Because this will not lead you to that chord. No matter what you do, it's not going to lead you there. Is it? Is it? Come on, say it. No. No. This is a wrong explanation. It has no, and that shows you the dogma of so-called harmonic or chordal inversion thinking and unnecessary respellings. Well, we also saw in that Beethoven example, right, where you have a D sharp that's really represented as E flat. But that is a convenience notation. Comes from 7 and 11, right? Because you don't want to have right next to one another a D sharp and an E flat when both of those are going to the same note. That's the difference. There are inharmonic respellings, but they have to make some kind of sense, right? The sound properties must be doing the right things. The sound property of this ain't doing the right thing, right? Because there's no way you can get to this. This demands a much more complex explanation than this simple explanation. The only thing you have to accommodate here is the octave transposition, which exposes the 6/4 position of this chord and allows you to get to the F major, right? This is what you hear, not that. Okay? So when you deal with Haydn, you have to look at the chromatic stuff very, very carefully, because Haydn's concept of harmonicity, things that contribute to like a gestalt image of a chord or tonality that's being created, is very subtle. And it is rooted in voice leading and counterpoint, not in the bogus theory of harmony or chords that are manufactured by stacking thirds on top of one another. That just doesn't make any sense. Or at least it's a much more complicated and irrational way to look at it. And if that were a scientific theory, this would be thrown out because it induces incredible complexity and it diminishes your simplicity and economy of explanation. There we go. That's the final pronouncement for today. Thank you so much for your participation. It's a great class, right? Don't get nervous, don't make mistakes, right? Right, don't be sorry, be accurate. Okay, I will see you next week. Come along. Thank you for the guest appearances. So great to have you here.
Thank you.
If I shut this, is it going to turn it off?
Probably.